Among the speakers at the recent CoinGeek conference in Zurich were two from IBM. That's good news for Bitcoin SV, as products and services are being developed on it for enterprises, large and small. So how does IBM rate the potential of Bitcoin SV? That's what I'm hoping to find out from my guest this week.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Charles Miller.
Welcome to this CoinGeek Conversations, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Tatjana Meier from IBM in Switzerland. Tatjana, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you, it's a pleasure to be here.
Can I ask you first of all about your job? You are blockchain practice leader for IBM services. Now, what does that mean in Switzerland? Yeah, so what does that mean?
So IBM is quite a big company and we have different divisions, and one division is in the services, so consulting business. And it's not about IT consultancy, but as well like strategy in different areas. And I'm helping clients to with their digitization journey, and blockchain obviously is a part of it.
So you inform yourself about what is available to that might be useful to them, and then somebody comes along and says, what would you suggest we do? Is it something like that?
Well, I would always listen to the client first, because quite often I think this is what quite often we are not as good as. So we tend to already think we know the solution instead of listening to people what they really need. So what's their problem? Right. And that's the first thing. And then we can look together with the client what is needed to solve that problem. And it might be blockchain, but it doesn't have to be blockchain. It really depends on the problem and what they want to solve.
And are they good at knowing what their problem is, or are they a bit sort of, I think we should have a bit of blockchain and digital stuff that...
I mean, quite often you find it, right? It's like, it really depends with whom you talk. That's the first thing. When you talk to the IT department, quite often it's a new technology, it's something exciting, it's something sexy. So they want to try it out. It's like, let's do something with blockchain, right?
You don't welcome that approach then, really?
I think I would be a bad consultant if I would try to sell something just for the sake of being able to say, I sold blockchain. I don't believe in it. I think it's really, and it won't be good for the relationship with the client as well, because if it doesn't fit, and you're not doing them a favor either. Right. So it's really about working together to find the best solution.
And so is it possible to say what kinds of problems you feel will point in the direction of a blockchain solution?
We always say, when you have I'm quite often in the supply chain area, and you see the information flow that quite often you only have information of one tier back, but you don't have the visibility along the supply chain.
Right, lots of different people passing goods from one to the next.
Correct.
Yeah.
So basically you don't know where the product comes from, right? We had this morning in the discussion in Germany, for example, there's this new law coming out, which is called in Germany Lieferkettengesetz. It's a supply chain law, and it's all about enforcing or ensuring that company knows where their resources come from. And this is something that companies quite often don't know, and so it's kind of reinforcing and ensuring that companies they do their due diligence.
So they really have to give an account of all the components and the history of a product.
Exactly.
Sounds like a lot of work.
And it's not easy, and you don't know, right? And if you don't know, then there might be a big scandal coming up eventually, because you hear that all the time about child labor, that big company gets accused again that one of their suppliers they did something unethical, and this falls then back to the big company, to the big name.
How far does that go? Because if I buy a packet of cornflakes, for instance, do the company that's making the cornflakes have to say where the red ink was made and what its components are? How much detail would you have to go into?
I think, well, it depends. Ideally, you should know when you have a pizza where the components of this pizza come from, right?
But the packaging as well, in theory?
Because it's all about sustainability. What's your CO2 footprint? I mean, it's huge. It's quite, yeah.
And so, to what extent then are blockchain solutions going to be really great for dealing with that kind of problem, do you think?
It gives you the transparency you don't have at the moment. And not only the transparency, but it's, for me, blockchain is the base that you need to get this end-to-end transparency, traceability. That's the first thing. But then obviously you have a lot of other things you can do on top of it, right? It's just the start, and you need obviously other things like analytics to analyze the data, harvest the data, do something with the data. You have Internet of Things, IoT devices to ensure that you connect the digital world with the physical world.
Now, IBM has its own blockchain.
We don't have our own. Well, we use Hyperledger. We work with Hyperledger, yeah.
Right,
but it's open
there's
source.
There's a special relationship between Hyperledger and IBM, I think. Is that right?
Well, IBM donated. It's the Linux Foundation. It's not IBM. Linux Foundation IBM is a member of Linux Foundation, like a lot of other companies. Like, I don't know what they are at the moment. 500. I could say that wrong. I don't know, but a huge amount. So it's not that IBM owns Hyperledger. No, it's open source.
I see. Okay, but so when a client, for instance, comes along talking to you about supply chain, how would you approach that problem? Would you just look at the various options, including Hyperledger and others, or what would your first move be?
Analyze the problem. What do they need? What problem do they want to solve?
Well, you've sort of defined the problem in the example that you just gave of this new law of providing all the information about the sources. So supposing that was what we're talking about, what would the next step be?
So we do quite often. We start with we call it design thinking workshop, where we really see what you need, what needs to be done, how does it look like, and then we identify. So what can we do to solve this problem, and what steps do we need to do? And Hyperledger. I mean, I'm part of IBM Services, so we're in the consulting area. We work with Hyperledger, but we're agnostic as well. So we can as well work with other blockchain solutions. It really depends what you need.
So we're here at the CoinGeek conference in Zurich, day one, in fact, today. Although people will be watching this a bit later. How did you come to be here, and what's the relationship between your work and Bitcoin SV, which obviously is what this conference is all about?
I think it's just, how can I say that? So I believe in the future it's going to be it's not the private blockchain or open blockchain. I think it's always going to be a combination, in my opinion. And some areas there might be private, and others, in terms of scalability and the network effect, it might be an open blockchain. And It really depends on the problem, and that's why I'm interested as well to look into that. I think you need to be open, right? You need to not have this tunnel vision.
When you talk about an open blockchain, that would be something like Bitcoin SV. Correct. Because there's no owner or organizer behind it. It's a network that people are free to come and join and leave as they want, as opposed to a network that is under the organization of a business or something like that. And so, what are the disadvantages of that open approach, would you say? Are there disadvantages as well as advantages?
I call it perceived disadvantages. Perceived. For me, one thing which, when I talk to companies, to enterprises, one question I always get is like, well, I don't know with this blockchain. Blockchain is, the electricity consumption, it's really bad for sustainability. So people don't distinguish then between private permissioned and open blockchain. That's the first thing. But it's very much a concern when it comes to sustainability.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that this is fact. I'm just saying that there's still a lot of education needed. It is still a fairly new technology. Yeah, it's still in the baby shoes. And people need to do a better job of educating people as well.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the question of the environment and sustainability rather than, well, what about all this ransomware payments and those other issues, it's all to do with trading drugs anonymously and stuff. The environmental concern is definitely sort of the number one problem in people's minds, would you say, these days?
Well, it's big, and you can see that, and I think it got reinforced and accelerated by COVID.
Yes.
Definitely, because people, and I see that as well with other blockchain. I had one of my project was around coffee, the traceability of coffee, and then as well connecting the end consumer with the farmer, with donations, so really inclusion of the farmer into the chain and give back. So sustainability very much an important part.
And are you saying that COVID has just made people more conscious of the resources that their lives use and that kind of thing? Yeah,
and I mean, we still see people that, they say they want to have bio products, but sometimes they are not willing to pay. But I think more and more they appreciate it, what needs to be done.
Well, there's going to be a panel about this particular question later on in the conference. You've probably seen it coming up.
Yes.
And I'm sure that the argument is going to be made in terms of sustainability that Bitcoin SV is different, and that is partly to do with the amount of information that will be on the blockchain, and also perhaps crucially and easier to understand, the fact that it exists to do useful work rather than just to make rich people richer or poorer eventually, depending on whether the price goes up or down. Will you be sort of interested to hear those arguments, and that'll be a useful, potentially, part of your discussions with some of these businesses, maybe?
Of course, definitely. And then, look, I was part of a meetup around the subject, exactly. And I said, there's a feedback afterwards. Look, to be honest, for me, the argumentation, the arguments, the rationale behind, I didn't get it. Might be that.
Well, in relation to what, Bitcoin SV?
It didn't convince me.
In relation to what, Bitcoin SV or Bitcoin in general, or
in
what?
general, it was more like a general approach, and like the arguments, why this is not true, why it doesn't stand. I said that might be the case, and I learned a lot about it. But the thing is that you need to translate it so that everyone understands it. A person that's more in the business and not in IT. And quite often, this still how we explain it. It's not. It needs to be easy. It needs to be simple.
But I mean, actually, as far as you're concerned, there may really be a genuine problem here, and that these people who are worried about it may be right to be worried.
Well, yeah.
Right.
It's like.
Well, as you say, more information needed. Open to hear what people have to say about it, at least. So, where do you think, in the work that you do, that is the best prospect for, if we were to come back in a year's time or 2 years' time, and you were persuaded to come and speak again about your fantastic project that has had a huge impact, that is using Bitcoin SV in a big way across the world or whatever, do you have an idea what kind of area you think that might be? What's the easiest possible success story that might emerge, do you think?
Easiest? I don't think. I think we're still in the early days, and nothing is that easy yet, I find. I see a lot of potential in the pharma industry, life science, in the public sector. in the textile industry.
In relation to supply chain accountability and those
I'm more
issues
into-
we're talking
yeah,
about. Yeah.
And simply, to be honest, it's something I'm hugely interested in combination with sustainability. That's kind of my baby, where I feel like that you can really make a difference.
And there's a lot of talk about tokenization here and non-fungible tokens and stuff. Do you see that coming into your work at all? I don't know if you saw the gentleman this morning with his construction company who is giving his own tokens in return for people making sort of advance payments on jobs, and then he will give a discount in return, and that's all on the Bitcoin SV blockchain. Are you interested in tokens?
Personally, not yet that much, to be quite frank with you. But I know my colleagues, they're like super interested. It's just for me, like, I don't know. I have at the moment other subjects that I'm more interested.
You're the blockchain practice leader. How deep do your sort of potential doubts go about the whole sector? Do you think that this whole blockchain thing is absolutely sure to be around and part of our business life and our personal lives in the years to come, or is that still open to question?
No, I think that's no doubt that it will stay. Are we yet there where we need to be? No, but it's early days still. That's why I say baby shoes. A lot of the argumentations I get from people is like, yeah, you're right, it's still early days, but it's not going to go away. And I think the benefits will be a lot, like it's going to be so beneficial for all of us, and it's needed, and it's something where we can do a lot of good and improve our processes and all the things as well internally for companies. It's huge benefits.
For businesses that are in consultancy, I hope I don't sound too cynical about this, but your bread and butter, as it were, is understanding a very complex ecosystem of solutions that a customer may not be able to get their head around because there's just too much of it. You're the experts on it. If Bitcoin SV does as well as people here hope that it will, it'll be the answer to everything. And that's not so good for consultants, because that element of complexity and uncertainty will be less, perhaps. I'm just putting an argument. What do you think?
Yeah. First of all, I don't think that blockchain is the solution to everything. That's my first thing, clearly. And as I said, right, even if clients say, you look, I think this is a blockchain case, I said, no, I mean, this is not a good case. And I think you're better off in this case with a central database. You don't need it. That's the first thing. And secondly, I think companies always will need support in one area, and blockchain is just one component of the whole digitization journey. There's a lot more to it. We call it sometimes like the intelligent workflow, right? Where you have, when you look at the end-to-end process, it can be other areas, procure to pay or whatever it is, right? And then you have different components, and blockchain might be one, or it might be IoT, or analytics, or maybe artificial intelligence, outsourcing, really what's needed. So I don't think this is going to be obsolete.
Is this the first CoinGeek conference you've been to?
Correct.
And what have your impressions been?
Interesting, super interesting, inspiring, a lot of innovation, and I mean, this is the exciting thing anyway, right? In that space, every day you learn new things, you learn new technologies coming up. That's great. I mean, when I talked about before about blockchain as being the basis, like for the transparency, but then you have IoT. I didn't know before, and I do admit that there's stuff around like where you can trace DNA from your meat, that you know where the meat really comes from, or that you have like a DNA spray where you can make sure that the cobalt has been sustainably resourced, where you can identify the cobalt and stuff like that. I think there's so much out, and so it's always like quite inspiring to go to these conferences and to learn new things, and to see like the entrepreneurship of people as well. Like, yeah.
If your colleagues say to you, well, what are these BSV entrepreneurs like? What's their sort of caliber, and how do you rate them? What would you say?
What would I say? I mean, some crazy people, crazy ideas, where you would think like, okay, weird, but then 5 years later, it's like, oh, actually, sometimes I think it's good to see that there's more, just step over it and, widen your horizon. And quite often you're so in your little hamster wheel, and then you realize, wow, actually, that's cool, that's great stuff. And some things work, others might not work, but if you don't try, and if you don't show this entrepreneurship and try new things, then you're not going to succeed. So it's great, it's inspiring.
Well, thank you very much, Tatjana, and I hope you will come back in 5 years' time and see some of these crazy ideas in action.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for your time.
you.
It's been great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed to Tatjana Meier from IBM. Next week, I'll be meeting another guest from Switzerland, Dr. Jörg Konzert, founder of the Money Museum. So if you wonder what you'd put in a money museum, join me next week and we'll find out. Please like or subscribe to CoinGeek Conversations if you would. But thanks very much for listening, and from me, Charles Miller, goodbye till next week.